everyone, and welcome to Lavender and Sage. I'm Abigail, and I use she, her pronouns. Before I begin, I'd like to mention that this series is very new, and this is my first time doing an out-of-school video, so please bear with me. I'm new to this, and I'm still exploring the path that this show will take me on. In this series, I'm planning to talk about LGBTQ+ representation, topics, and issues that affect the queer community. Representation is vitally important to the acceptance of queer people around the world, and even though it seems small in the grand scheme of things, the way the community is portrayed in media impacts people's safety, happiness, and the way they live their lives. I first want to start by saying that representation is subjective. Because of this, I'm going to be sharing my opinion as a reader and a person who consumes media, and as a person affected by this representation. Today, I'll be discussing a novel titled They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. The book alternates between many characters' perspectives and details both the exciting, heartwarming, and tragic events that follow the phone calls. I will try my best not to spoil too much, but to be fair, the main spoiler is in the title. This book is praised in reviews and worshipped on social media apps like TikTok, and in my opinion, it rightfully deserves all of the hype. The writing style is compelling, and I love how it dove really deep into the characters' thoughts and feelings. I also enjoyed how the story was told over the course of only one day. This allowed for the story to employ descriptive language and very detailed accounts of all of the events and conversations that happened on that day. Honestly, I was shocked by how much I liked it because I thought it was just going to be a cheesy romance novel, but it was really so much more. I quickly became attached to the characters, and I felt as if I truly knew them by the end of the book. I could go on and on about why I loved it so much, but I'm going to focus specifically on the representation present in the novel, which centers around main characters that are queer men who eventually fall in love. Throughout the book, it is mentioned multiple times that Rufus identifies as bisexual, while Mateo never states his identity. We first learn about Rufus's sexuality by his profile on Last Friend, which is the app that the characters use to connect with each other. However, Mateo does not put his sexuality on his profile and instead chooses to skip the question, never disclosing why as the book continues. Mateo and Rufus get close throughout the book, and eventually, Rufus decides to open up to Mateo about his coming out story. He talks about coming out to his ex-girlfriend and his family. Okay, quick spoiler, but not really a spoiler because this information is disclosed pretty early in the book. Rufus's family passed away in a tragic accident. He chose to come out to his family on the day that he knew they were going to die because they got a call from Deathcast, which is the company that sends the phone calls that alerts people that they're going to die that day. He chooses to do so because he knows it would be their last day together. In the scene, Rufus says, "My parents had never hugged me like they did on their end day. I'm really proud I spoke up to get that moment out of them." I really liked this coming out story because the author crafted the situation in such a touching manner. It was really unique and just really interesting. I also liked how it was kind of brief because it wasn't super relevant to the plot or Rufus's character development and his character in general. I feel like Rufus didn't really see his sexuality as a big deal or one of his major defining traits, so it makes sense that he didn't see the need to talk about it for too long. He's also a confident and laid-back character who's very comfortable with himself and with his sexuality. Also, he was told he was going to die that day, so I don't think he really wanted to dwell in the past very much. Another thing I'd like to add is that one of the supporting characters was Rufus's ex-girlfriend. I personally liked how he was both in queer and heterosexual relationships, and the book didn't really make a big deal about it. It normalizes the idea that people can date people of different and same genders, and it doesn't change the kind of person or partner they are. I think this character is a great example of positive bisexual representation. He doesn't really perpetuate any of the stereotypes that are harmful to the bisexual community. For example, there's a huge stereotype that bisexual people are cheaters because they have twice the options. I've heard things both in person and online along the lines of, "I'd never date a bisexual person, I'd just be really worried about them looking at other people." Another stereotype about bisexual people is that they are overly flirty and rebellious. Although Rufus is a confident and rebellious character, his sexuality has absolutely nothing to do with it. First of all, he doesn't overstep any of Mateo's boundaries, and he's never really overly flirty. Also, some people think that since being bisexual differs from social norms, bisexual people don't really care about what society thinks about them. Rufus doesn't really care what people think about him, but it's not because of his sexuality. He's been through a lot of trauma that's led to him wanting to live in the moment and be his most authentic self. Mateo's relationship with his sexuality is quite different, but I liked his storyline just as much. Like I said, Mateo doesn't ever explicitly state his sexuality. However, things get a little bit complicated when Mateo decides to visit his father. It is revealed in the first few pages of the book that Mateo's dad is in a coma and is in an intensive care unit. Mateo decides to say goodbye to his father, and when doing so, he tells him that he wants to tell him something about his life, but never actually says it. Given the context of the book being a romance between the two male main characters and the wording of his sentences, it can be assumed that he was planning to come out to his father before he dies. I'm going to read part of it because it was really powerful. I was raised to be honest, but the truth can be complicated. It doesn't matter if the truth won't make a mess. Sometimes the words don't come out until you're alone. Even that's not guaranteed. Sometimes the truth is a secret you're keeping to yourself because living a lie is easier. I personally find this statement really relatable, and it seems to mirror the experience that a lot of other LGBTQ+ people I've talked to have gone through. It accurately depicts the thought processes I've had before I came out. It's not necessarily that he doesn't want to, it's just that he doesn't want anything to change. I think it was a great scene, even if it wasn't necessarily a coming out scene. This might be a controversial opinion, but one of the things I liked about this book is it didn't talk about being queer very much. The parts I just discussed are the only parts that I can think of. I think this is fitting because this book isn't about being queer. It's about a pair of star-crossed lovers who know that their day will end in both of them dying. This book could be about a heterosexual couple, and the story would stay mostly the same. In my opinion, it's important to normalize queerness. I'm not saying that stories about people coming to terms with their identity is bad. I think those kind of stories are great, and they're definitely necessary. They help people feel seen, and it's important that people have stories that they can relate to. It's also important for straight and cisgender people to understand queer perspectives so that we can have a more understanding, empathetic, and socially aware society. However, it's also important to have stories where queer relationships are treated similarly to heterosexual relationships, because being queer shouldn't be seen as being othering or being different. It should be normal. I'd love to live in a society where people aren't automatically assumed to be straight, and where straight people and queer people can be treated the same. This book balances those things perfectly. Characters are their own people with their individual stories and identities, but like I said, this book isn't about being queer. It's about a pair of star-crossed lovers, and it's just simply really good. That's all I really have to say. It's simply a good book with great representation, and I'd highly recommend it if anyone wants a book that will warm their heart and then have it absolutely shattered. Next episode, I will be talking about Atypical, which is a show on Netflix with interesting bisexual representation. Thank you so much for listening, and please let me know if you have any book, movie, or TV show recommendations. You can just put them in the comments, or you can let me know on Instagram, which I will link below.